Governor Perry and Mr. Gingrich to join us. Thank you, Jim Shortner. That was excellent dinging. Once again, we want to thank you for joining us at the 13th annual policy orientation for the Texas Legislature. It has been such a blessing to be able to do this. And when we look back at the last 3 days, it's a bit of a blur. But I will say that hearing from Steve Forbes, Governor-elect Greg Abbott, Senator Phil Gramm, and Kent Hance yesterday. Of course, last night, our entire new team of statewide elected officials, Dan Patrick, Ken Paxton, Glenn Hager, and Sid Miller, last night on the Future of Texas panel. It is just such a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for all of us to come together. And I understand that not everyone in this room will agree with everything that is said, and certainly everything that the Texas Public Policy Foundation says or that our wonderful governor says, but at the end of the day, we are all here to make Texas a better place. In his first inaugural address in 1981, President Reagan said, speaking eloquently about the value of the average American, he said, "We have every right to dream heroic dreams. Those who say that we're in a time when there are not heroes, they just don't know where to look. You can see heroes every day going in and out of factory gates. Others, a handful in number, produce enough food to feed us all and the world beyond. You meet heroes across a counter, and they're on both sides of the counter. There are entrepreneurs with faith in themselves and faith in an idea who create new jobs, new wealth, and new opportunity." Reagan's words 34 years ago, hard to believe, were an homage to a nation, and they still are. But today, in 2015, those words are something else. They are a tribute, Governor Perry, to our Texas. Amen. They speak of the migrants who come to us from New York and California and from Illinois, many who are in this room today, and from every state where big government and big bureaucracy stifle ambition and deter achievement. And they speak of the Texans whose roots run deep, to sharecropping immigrants from the late 1800s, to the old 300 families many of you may be related to of the Austin Colony, and to the first Spanish settlements of the 18th century. But now, once upon a time, the dire straits of the mid-19th century, America and the Americans came forth to save Texas from the tyranny of Mexico that had consumed Mexico and the tumult of Mexico. But now, in the 21st century, we believe that Texas and Texans can repay that debt by saving America. For our final event of policy orientation, we are so privileged to have two of our era's great architects of liberty, joined by one of the most keen and energetic students of American freedom in the public square. My friend Steve Moore, formerly of the Wall Street Journal and now chief economist at the Heritage Foundation, has been such a tremendous ally and such an advocate for us for so many years. The founder of the Club for Growth and the Free Enterprise Fund has done more for American liberty in Steve's career than most organizations achieve in their lifetime. Steve, how wonderful to have you in Texas again. Please help me welcome Steve Moore. And what American is not in debt to Speaker Newt Gingrich, the leader of the 1994 congressional revolution that returned control of the United States House of Representatives to the Republicans for the first time in 4 decades, would have been had secured his place in history on that achievement alone. But Mr. Gingrich did not rest on those laurels. In the intervening 20 years, it's been that long, the indefatigable patriot, scholar, and leader has made his mark in arenas from policy innovation to novels to a little presidential campaign, distinguished by his incisive critique of the current White House. He has been such an incredible source of powerful ideas for so long. I get emails from Mr. Gingrich every now and then, and there's always an attachment with a lot of ideas attached to that email, and it is really an extraordinary thing to know and be friends and understand what an incredible force of good Newt Gingrich has been for this country. And let's give Newt another big round of Texas applause. Welcome back. And finally, my counselor and mentor and hero, Governor Rick Perry, the longest serving governor in Texas history. A worthy successor to Sam Houston, a towering figure in the national conversation, a tireless antagonist of Washington, D.C., a peerless advocate for Texas, and I'm proud to say a good friend of so many of us in this room. What can we say about Rick Perry that we haven't said time and again, and yet the things we say about him time and again are things that he so richly deserves? The extraordinary change in the position of Texas in the Perry era is rightly credited to his vision, his leadership, and his adherence to principle, Governor, just as we talked about Ronald Reagan yesterday, in his 14 years as our chief executive, and what a difference he has made. When he took office, Texas was just one big state of many big states. When he took office, Texas was a job creator of no particular note. Today, it is the job creator that has nearly propped up the entire national economy. When he took office, Texas was a state with a disproportionate reliance on a few economic sectors. Today, it is a well-diversified economy that competes directly and usually wins against California and New York for any Fortune 500 headquarters. And when he took office, Texas was often a place where people moved away to pursue their dreams in places like New York City and Los Angeles. But today, it is a place where people from all over the world move to because they know they can make their dreams come true. There are many metrics by which to assess Governor Perry's legacy, but I think the most important might be this. His Texas fulfills Reagan's imperative that we have every right to dream heroic dreams. Please help me welcome our governor. With
Thank you. I didn't know you all were that happy I was leaving.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for being here, and thank you all for being here. I always joke that I've known Brooke Rollins for 15 years, and half of those years she's been pregnant. It's one of the few times she's not, and how does she do it all, right? She's a Renaissance woman, and Brooke, I'm one of those people who does agree with just about everything that's ever been written by the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I call it the gold standard of the state think tanks, and you're really lucky to have this great institute here in the state of Texas. There is one of my favorite quotes in history, and Newt, you probably know this one, is Franklin Roosevelt one time said in a meeting with Winston Churchill, he said, Winston, it is an honor to have lived in the same decade as you did. And I am sort of overwhelmed by this. I mean, when Brooke called me a few weeks ago and said, would you come to Austin and interview Newt Gingrich and Rick Perry, I said, I'll hitchhike to Austin to do that. I'd love to do it, and so I'm excited to be here. And I have to say this in all seriousness. In this room, within 20 feet of me is, and I wonder how many of you agree with me, the greatest Speaker of the House in the last 50 years, in Newt Gingrich, the greatest governor of any state in 50 years in Rick Perry, and on top of that, the greatest senator of the United States in Phil Graham. And so it is so cool to be here with you. Okay, so let's get right down to business. And I'm going to start with a tough question for you, Governor, something as a non-Texan that people are saying about Texas all over the country, that this great run that you've had for the 15 years that Brooke talked about, the amazing job growth. I think over, the last 6 years you've created as many jobs here in Texas as the 29 states combined, but now people are saying, it's over for Texas. These low gas prices and the low oil prices are going to cause a recession in Texas, and it's not going to be like the way it was. What would you say to people, and non-Texans, to people who say that the Texas miracle is over?
Well, there was an interesting front page story in the Wall Street Journal over the course of, I think, about the last 72 hours. and there was a J.P. Morgan analyst who said that Texas was going to go into a recession, so which makes me think that J.P. Morgan is shorting Texas. It's the only thing I can figure out of that. In that same article, there were some rather substantial individuals who I trust substantially more than a J.P. Morgan analyst, like the current Dallas Fed Chairman Fisher, who made the statement that the Texas of 2015 is not the Texas of 1985. And his point was that we are an incredibly diverse state now. In 1985, as I got here to start my legislative career 30 years ago, we were inextricably intertwined to one industry, and that was oil. The banking industry, the real estate industry was all tied up in that one industry. So when we went from $30 to $8, that was not it was a very difficult period of time. I want to say 8 or 9 years, Ernie, of which we struggled to get back on our feet. And since that early 90 period of time, the diversification that has occurred in Texas has been broad, it's been deep, whether it's in the manufacturing side, which is the medical technology side. Houston, Texas, now the home of the largest medical center in the world. All of those added together with our other diversifications. Now, are our technology folks working on this in and out of our microphones? Because if they're not, then we need to get some Aggies back there and let them get to work on this. So, sorry, not to pick on you folks, but that's really So I think the point with all of this is that there will be places that is very uncomfortable as we go through this. I have had conversations with people that I respect in the industry, people who have seen this movie more than once, individuals who have extraordinary backgrounds in both the production side of our natural resources, the transportation side of that, and then in the value added. 3 different people that I consider to be very capable, and their projections are that this is going to last for probably a couple of quarters. And there will be a shakeout. Listen, Midland, Odessa, this is going to be a painful period of time. There will be parts of Houston that have to make some changes, and there will be some restrictions. There will be some constrictions. There will be some transformation going on. But and a huge part of Texas, this is a two-edged sword, Steve, as we talked about earlier. You know, when the price of oil goes down, consumer spending is going to go up. We're going to see the cost of transportation go down.
Right.
With a couple of good choices made in Washington D.C., like opening up the XL pipeline, like allowing our federal estate to be expanded and develop the natural resources that are in the federal estate, some corporate tax policy reform that would send the message that we're going to allow for you to expend dollars on the manufacturing side in this country and keep more of what you work for, to bring money back offshore into the United States. Those changes could create a dynamic in this country and in Texas. I will suggest to you, if we have a manufacturing renaissance in America, Texas will be the epicenter of it. But those are the things that we have that I think are in our future. Yes, this is going to be a bit of belt tightening in places. But their projection is that in the third quarter of 2015, we'll start to see that surplus being absorbed, and that the price will return to some level, obviously above this $50 level that we're in now. You know, is it $70? Is it $80? I'll let the economists make that projection. But this is going to be, according to those people I really respect, a relatively short-lived economic challenge for a state like Texas. We're going to continue to be the epicenter for job creation, I will suggest to you. There will still be, I mean, as long as we keep freedom from over taxation, freedom from over litigation, freedom from over-regulation, as long as we continue to challenge our public schools to be accountable so that that skilled workforce is in place. Texas will still be, in the end of 2015, and I think going forward, the place that the vast majority of people would like to live, to raise their family, to have their business. That is the,
Okay.
yes, there is going to be an uncomfortable period of time. But
Now, last week, can you all hear me? Okay. Last week, a lot of people didn't take notice of this because it happened between Christmas and New Year's, and I'd like both your comments on that. The Obama administration put out 6 new EPA rules dealing with the oil and gas industry. And many of these could, at a time when the industry is struggling, these could sort of strangle the industry. And your energy producers in this state have really been kind of in combat with the EPA for the last 10 years. How big of a problem are these regulations, and do we need a federal EPA? Can't states like Texas monitor their own environment without federal monitoring?
Yeah, look, I think you have to understand what the purpose of the current EPA is. The purpose of the current EPA is to destroy all fossil fuel industries, period. You had a President of the United States go to Detroit this week and lecture the American people that they should not count on inexpensive gasoline. That would be a huge mistake because he favors expensive fuel. And he favors expensive fuel because you can't have a society which is as carbon-free as he would like unless you raise the price of fossil fuels to a radical degree. So this is not the Environmental Protection Agency. This is the liberal ideological implementation and enforcement agency, and we should have a bill to change its name so people understand it. Well, the Congress has to be prepared to take the president head on and to cut off funding and to say you can't do these things. But we, I think, who are conservatives, have to communicate to the American people. When I campaigned in 2012, I talked about $2.50 a gallon gasoline. I had the president attack me. I had his press secretary saying I was a liar. Now that the price of gasoline has dropped this much, and I favor less expensive fuel. I know it causes some challenge for producers, but historically producers figure out a way to make money at almost any price over time. And the fact is, for the average American, a less expensive fuel system is an enormous competitive advantage in the world. We should be taking the president on head on and saying, in Detroit, you called for expensive gasoline, so every middle-class American has less money in their pocket. Now, do you, Mr. President, and do you, Secretary Clinton, agree that ripping off the American people with artificially high prices through regulations imposed by Washington is the future you favor? And let's have the 2016 campaign on this simple choice. Bureaucracies get to cripple your life and raise your costs to make a handful of rich environmentalist fanatics happy, or we have free markets, free enterprise, lower expenses, more jobs, and you get to have a lot more choices. You pick which future you like better. I think we'd win that referendum in a crushing margin.
Spot on. And here's the other side of that picture, if you will.
People are going to say, oh, well, Texas can't monitor its own standards. They're going to pollute and so on. What do you say to that?
For the last decade, we have monitored our standards. And here was what the result is. And keep in mind, this is in the state that created more jobs than any other state in the nation. Since 2007, 1.4 million jobs created in this state. If you backed out the number of jobs created in Texas since 2007, the United States would be 400,000 jobs below where they were in 2007. That is the power of what's happened in this very diverse economy. During the period of time of which I've been governor, which so many of the members of the legislature are here with us today, and I want to say thank you for being great partners, because this didn't happen by itself. It didn't happen just because the governor of the state of Texas was in that seat, in that office. It happened because we together had a vision, we implemented that vision. The nitrogen oxide levels in the state that has led the nation in the creation of jobs, that's added 5.6 million people to its rolls since 2001. The nitrogen oxide levels are down by 63%. The ozone levels are down by 23%. The total carbon footprint is down by 11%. The fraud that this administration would perpetrate on Americans and say, you cannot have growth and take care of your environment has been proven wrong, and it's not a theory, it is a model, and it is working in Texas, and it can work across this country. That's the story that's got to be told across this country.
So I want to stay with this. Can you all hear me? I don't know if the microphone is working. If you'll get the microphone up. I want to stay with this theme about energy because it is such an incredible story. And what I'd like to ask both of you about is this kind of theme that I've been writing about, whether you agree with this. And we saw some results of this from the 2014 November elections, where Republicans did very well with working class Americans. And the theme I would like both of you to kind of talk a little bit about is how can Republicans win back these, let's call them the Reagan blue-collar industrial union workers that Ronald Reagan won, a big percentage of them. And what I'm kind of asking, Newt, goes off of what you were just saying, that how can the Democrats say they stand with working class Americans, welders, construction workers, teamsters, pipe fitters, when they don't want to develop our own industries and they are against all of these kinds of technologies that have allowed our industries to flourish? In other words, should Republicans go right to these working class Americans and say, we're the ones who are trying to save your jobs, these radical green environmentalists are the ones who are trying to destroy your jobs?
Well, the short answer is yes, but I would go a stage further than that. I think the lesson of 2014, if you look across the country, here in Texas, if you look at Senator Cornyn, who actually carried a plurality of Latinos, if you look at how well he did with other ethnic groups, if you look at Colorado, where the Republican nominee tied the Democratic incumbent senator among Latinos, if you look in California, where we began picking up Vietnamese state senators, I want to start. I am deeply opposed to the idea that there's somehow 47% of the country that doesn't care about us. I believe the Republican Party should target everybody. We should be targeting the graduate student who's about to go out into an economy where they will never get a job doing what they're studying because Obama is so bad. And by the way, there's some indications we carried people under 35 everywhere in the country, that you have had a fundamental shift in what's going on. So I start with the premise, when you have a system as bankrupt and as failed as the Obama system, don't deny anyone the opportunity to vote for you. Governor Deal doubled the African-American vote he got in Georgia because he cared about criminal justice reform, which actually started in many ways with Governor Perry and with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Literally doubled against Jimmy Carter's grandson, his share of the black vote. John Kasich got 26% of the black vote and was endorsed by the largest black newspaper in Ohio. There are opportunities everywhere. Now, is that true particularly for working Americans? Yes, and the truth is we are now, if you look at, there's just an analysis that came out this morning. If you look at congressional districts, the Democratic Party is collapsing among non-college educated whites. It is a disaster on a scale that is unimaginable. Why was that? Well, I think it's first of all because the radicalism of the left infuriates culturally. They didn't lose West Virginia just over economics. They lost West Virginia because they no longer sound like they're Americans in the sense that West Virginians thought of as Americans. When you have the White House yesterday say that one of our jobs is to more effectively communicate moderate Islam, which is an insane assignment for the White House. They can't communicate Christianity. They can't communicate Judaism. They can't communicate American exceptionalism. They sure aren't going to communicate moderate Islam from this particular White House. But if you're a normal, everyday American out here and you listen to that stuff, you think to yourself, these guys are just crazy. It's not just that they're incompetent, they're crazy. And I remember many years ago, I was taught by a Louisiana senator who said to me that when George McGovern got nominated and Louisiana for the first time broke decisively away, it happened because a couple driving down the road would look at each other and say, you know, he ain't us. And that was it. The rest of it was detail. And Phil is an example of this. I first knew Phil, he was still a Democrat. It was I knew, Reagan had been a Democrat, but I'd gotten over that by then. But he was still a Democrat. We served in the Congress. He was a Democrat. Then one morning you woke up and thought, they ain't us. Well, that's happened to millions of Americans. But my argument is it can also happen among African Americans. It can happen with the young. It can happen with about half the professors and 20% of the movie stars. I mean, there are a lot of opportunities out there, and we should be the party that wants to include everybody who wants to build a better America.
Can you improve on that?
20% of the movie stars?
We get a
You're an
good-looking
optimist.
guy like you
You're
on the ticket,
you're
they'll
an
come
optimist.
flocking.
That's good. I think reaching out to this disparate group of people and that historically Republicans couldn't talk to. I'll give you a good example, the Teamsters Union.
Right.
The Teamsters of Reagan got the
They
Teamsters
want
Union.
pipelines, right?
They want pipelines. They want jobs.
Right.
You look back over the years that I ran for governor, senator, and the Teamsters unions endorsed me.
Wow.
Because the Teamsters, not because I was a dyed-in-the-wool AFL-CIO member, which I am. You didn't know that, did you? Not only did I used to be a Democrat senator, I belonged to the AFL-CIO. Got the card in my pocket. And they probably hate it that I pay my dues every quarter. But the fact is that when you reach out to the Teamsters and you talk to them about job creation, when you talk to the young Hispanic who may be from a lifelong Democrat family, but you talk to them about why their future looks so bright, because they're living in a new 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. They're talking about where their children are going to go to college because of the policies that you Republicans put into place in this state. Policies that will transcend anywhere. That's the story that we have to be good about. We have to not take the bait on social issues that pull us apart. You all in the states can take care of those. Those are not federal issues. When we're able to tell those stories in a way that are touching people's hearts, at that particular point in time, then regardless of where you're from or what your political affiliation may have used to have been, these Republicans are going to put policies into place where my family and I have a better future, have a more profound future. And when we're able to do that in this thoughtful, passionate, compassionate way, then I think the possibility of getting 50% of those, 50% of the professors may be harder than 20%.
We don't want 50% of their vote.
Of the Hollywood types. But that ought to be our goal. I mean, that ought to be our goal, to go talk to people reasonably, thoughtfully about the economic future of their families.
So let me ask you about Hispanics, because there's kind of a rule of thumb that Republicans need to win about maybe 40% of the Hispanic vote to win on the national level. Republicans haven't done that as a party. One of the things that struck me about Texas, Senator, is that Hispanics are conservative in this state, whereas you go to California, Hispanics are liberal. And I've never quite figured that out. What is it about Hispanics that make them so much more open to our message in Texas than maybe in other places?
Well, I think you're absolutely correct that a Hispanic in Florida is different from a Hispanic in New York, is different from a Hispanic in Texas, is different from a Hispanic in Colorado or California. And I think if we try to go talk to people about policies that they all can understand, we're not trying to regionalize them or trying to do anything other than to stay focused upon those economic policies that will make their lives better and give them choices. the Democrats, frankly, I don't think have a narrative that is about choice. This is as far as you're going to get to go in all too many programmatic items that they lay out. And we need to talk about freedom. We need to talk about the future being brighter and to give them the choices that our policies will make. So I'm quite comfortable. I mean, Greg Abbott got over 50% of the Hispanic vote, and I think 45 or 50%, and Dan Patrick did as well, because they talked about economic opportunities. And I got to think that no matter whether you live in California or in New York, that a better economic future for you and or your family is going to get the attention of and get the support of enough of the Hispanic voter across this country that we can be very powerful.
Okay, so
in that
let's
community.
talk about this economic message. So the two of you are probably the most qualified people in the country to be the next president, and I mean that very sincerely. I mean, either of these guys would make incredible presidents, right? So, so I want to ask you both, and just, you know, we're a little bit short on time, but if you were President Newt, and if you become president in 2016, what would be the first 3 things that you would do immediately? I remember when you did the Contract with America, you did, you know, 10 things right away. But what are 3 things that you would do, Newt and Governor, to get this economy
You're
on
picking on me, right?
to get this economy growing, and not at 2%, but 4 or 5?
Well, 2 of them I've already told you. Open up the... well, I'm thinking of the third one as we're working here. Open up the XL pipeline, open up that federal estate, get the oil and gas industry as flexible and as open and as creating as many jobs as we can. And obviously the corporate tax side of it. And the third thing, and I think
Well,
it's...
what would you do on the corporate tax? I mean, would
Well,
you...
obviously, I think just simplifying the corporate tax is one of the first things and the easiest thing that you can do. Put incentives in the tax policy that basically says if you will invest in America, you get to keep more of what you and write it from there. The third thing is to secure the border with Mexico. Americans want this border secure. It's the one thing I think that we can put on the president's desk that he will have a very difficult time saying why he would veto that. Matter of fact, I think he has a hard time explaining to the American people why he would veto any of those. Right. And do it in a respectful way. I hope the Republican Party will put pieces of legislation, thoughtful pieces of legislation on his desk, like opening up the XL. Let him explain to his Teamsters supporters why he's killing those jobs. Let him explain to Americans why it's so important for this small group of political activists in his party to be satisfied, and Americans are losing jobs because of this. Let him explain to Americans why it's not proper to have these incentives to be put in place for our corporate entities so that they can help create more jobs and bring the manufacturing renaissance into this country. Let him explain to Americans why we should not secure that border with with Mexico and those drug cartels that are using it to bring drugs and or unsavory individuals here. Let the president explain that. We will respectfully put these thoughtful pieces of legislation on his desk.
Well, let me say, first of all, I don't disagree with any of the framework that Governor Perry just put together. And I think controlling the southern border is extraordinarily important. And I recommend to all of you a new novel by a friend of mine, Bill Fortune, who's written books with me, called Day of Wrath, which is about ISIS crossing the southern border to launch 12 simultaneous school attacks based on the Beslan model where the Chechens killed 350 school children. The book was written before the recent attack in Pakistan. It's a very sobering book, and it's a reminder that we had better take very seriously, and look at Paris again, this whole notion that we are in a global war that we're totally unprepared for. So I think that part's right. But I would be inclined to approach it a little bit differently just from this standpoint. I was part of the process in 1980, and the Heritage Foundation, where you are now, issued a mandate for leadership, which had over 2,000 specific suggestions. And they brought in 250 people, most of whom ended up in the Reagan administration. So the people who are going to do the Interior Department were writing the chapter on what you ought to do about the Interior Department. So, you know, they didn't arrive and start thinking about it, they arrived and did it. I would hope we as a party will follow that kind of planning process of working back from January, February, March of 2017, so that the 2016 process is actually about the kind of 2017 you want. Because Hillary will lose, if this is an election about the future, she loses. If this is an election about celebrity status, she might win. I suspect the number one thing I would do, just in the context where we are right now, is I would ask for an omnibus executive order rescinding about 90% of the executive orders. So that you would literally walk in the first day, and I do it down in Paris. You walk in the first day, and you sign the Keystone Pipeline, which is easy, because it could be done tomorrow morning at the State Department if they weren't being stopped by rich left-wing environmentalists. Second, you can issue whatever it takes to control the border. And then third, you instantly deregulate large chunks of the American economy to enable Americans the following morning to go back to investing and creating jobs and hiring people. And you would have, by the end of the first week, a different country. It's a much broader, more exciting country. The other thing I think the next president ought to do, if they're a Republican, and this may surprise some of you, they should spend a significant part of December meeting with Democrats. And they ought to say to all of them, look, if you're determined to be my opponent, that you can be. I mean, that's certainly your right. But if there's anything we could work on together to heal America and to bring America back together, I want to know what it is. I mean, a brand new president has enormous mystique to be able to look people in the eye. And had Barack Obama done this in 2008, 2009, we'd be in a different world right now. But you have to have integrity and mean it. And you have to actually allow them to be part of the game if you want them to be supportive of the game. And so I think it's important for us to we want to be the party which unifies the country, not just the party which beats the Democrats.
So there was a fairly disturbing... There was a fairly disturbing poll that came out a month or two ago that found that only like 35% of Americans believe in the American dream anymore. They're very worried about the future of their kids. And I would even make the case they're probably overly pessimistic. The Democrats all want to talk about income disparities and wealth, maldistribution of wealth. How do we, as conservatives, take on that issue? Because it is going to be front and center, whether we like it or not. They're going to throw this at us, minimum wage and gender equity and all these things. How do we do that?
That poll obviously was not done in Texas.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Because Texans have a very bright outlook about the future. I will suggest to you, and it's because of what these men and women have done together in the legislature over the course of the last 14 years, and the last 12 years and specifically. And what I remind people of, Talmadge, in 2003 was the first time since the 1870s that there was all Republican leadership. Because prior to Speaker Craddock being elected in 2003, there was always someone that would block that good, solid, conservative agenda. And in 2003, we had the opportunity, faced with a $10 billion shortfall, I might add, when we got here that day in January of 2003. We did what we said we would do, and we implemented tax policy, regulatory policy. We filled that $10 billion without raising taxes. We passed the most sweeping lawsuit reform in the nation and put Texas on this trajectory. And I think, again, this goes back to being able to have a narrative and be able to tell a story with our hearts as well as with our heads about that there is a better day, there is a great and extraordinary future of this country. The better days of America is ahead of us. I mean, if we're able to go tell that story and do it in a way that people know is true, then we will be successful. And I think that's the challenge for the Republican Party. That's the challenge for conservatives as we go forward, is to be able to be great storytellers, and great storytellers with the facts to back us up, but to share this amazing story of what this country can be again, that every child can. I mean, when the child of tenant farmers can become governor of Texas, that's a great story. And I'm pretty sure there were a lot of teachers at Paint Creek Rural School had no idea they were training up a governor back in the 50s and the 60s. But that needs to be our story, and that needs to be what they hear from us often about the best days of this country, the best days of this state are still in front of us.
So, Newt, how do we take on this idea that Republicans just care about rich people?
A couple things here. I mean, first of all, I think what Governor Perry just said is as profound about politics as anything you could say, and I wish every Republican could learn this core message, which is telling stories so that people understand you on their terms is the center of political leadership in a free society. I was struck with Faulkner's Nobel Prize speech, which he closes by saying mankind will endure and prevail. And part of what we have to say is, you know, if you looked at the current disaster in Washington, you look at the current bureaucracies in Washington, you look at the current radical values among judges, you could easily imagine that America's at risk. And America is at risk until the American people rise up and take it back, at which point they will radically change the country back towards a healthy future in ways that we'll look back on as historic as it happens. So, I mean, part of the people being depressed is a function of reality. You know, when you look at Barack Obama, his appointees, his judges, his values, his incompetence, his bureaucracy, it is reasonable to suggest that the road got harder somehow in the last few years. Second, on this whole issue of rich and poor, it's a function of how really bad we are as a political party. We may be terrific as an ideological party, but we're really bad as a political party. I mean, the idea that you're going to have Hillary Clinton in a private jet going from $250,000 speech to $250,000 speech, decrying the gap between rich and poor, and we are not clever enough to turn that into a satirical film of enormous power to just say.
Wait, Newt, are you telling us you don't get $250,000 per speech?
But if I did, I'd be proud of it and say it's a good thing to do. I wouldn't explain that we were once poor and didn't have a house and it was really terrible. We were leaving the presidency, we didn't even know if we'd survive, and we weren't sure we could apply for food stamps because, you know, it was really complicated. And you know, and this is crazy. We have to relax and get a life and say, look, the fact is we want to create a country where everyone can rise. They want to create a country where they control everybody as they decline. Now you decide which of those two futures you like better.
So I want to ask you one more question, then Brooke, if we have some time for a question or two from the audience, that would be great. So we have a problem in terms of our employment situation. It's not just that there are not enough jobs being created under Obama's policies, but I would submit to you that when I talk to a lot of employers, they say, we have jobs. We just can't find the workers to fill these jobs. And some of them are welders or pipe fitters, some of them are engineers, mechanics. It's a tragedy, actually. I mean, we could probably fill 2 million more people into jobs tomorrow if Americans had the skills and know how to do these things. What do conservatives, what do we propose as conservatives to make sure that, that when kids graduate from high school and even college, that they have the skills necessary to compete in this global economy?
Again, your former employee had a really interesting Wall Street Journal about job creation, about the welder. I don't know how many of you read it just within the last 48 hours.
$125,000?
And being, I think there are a number of things that need to occur. One is we need to make our institutions of higher learning past high school substantially more affordable and accessible.
And accountable?
Well, they become more affordable and accessible when they become more accountable.
Right.
But
Thank you.
But the business community also has a role to play in this.
Okay.
Is that, and when I graduated from Paint Creek Rural School and going to college was my parents' goal. And that post-World War II generation and sending your kids to a four-year institution was a badge that you had become a successful parent. And you know, I'll leave the whole criticism of higher education to the Texas Public Policy Foundation for right now, and just talk about that. I think that we have to, as a business community, as business leaders, I think men and women in the business world that are business leaders have to stand up and say, you know what, getting this certificate or getting this associate degree is every bit as good or even better than going to an institution and staying for 6 years and having a huge debt and can't get a job when you get out. And I think we have to have a transitional period in this country where that everyone is not going to be going to a four-year institution, but that's not a bad thing, and that's not a badge of dishonor. It's you know, the fact is we need to be creating that workforce that's making that $125,000 a year as a welder, making that young Hispanic in South Texas that's making over $100,000 a year driving a truck. That needs to be heralded and being held up and say, this is good. Now, that's not to say we turn our back on our higher education and we don't continue to push them to be more accountable, but I think the idea that we have to really have a transitional period in this country on that educational opportunity that occurs after they get out of that 12th grade and go into that next step in life, and to give substantially more choices, make it more affordable, make it more accessible, and make it more accountable.
Actually, first of all, I agree with everything the governor just said, and I would add a couple of pieces to it. The first thing to remember is the scale of change we're living through. Microsoft 2 days ago introduced a $29 cell phone.
Wow.
Motorola 20 years ago produced a StarTAC at $1,000. The $29 cell phone is dramatically better and has all sorts of capabilities that the StarTAC didn't have. That's in 20 years. So one of my points is we want to be thinking about lifetime learning. You can become a welder at 45.
Right.
You know, there are lots of things you can do in life, and we've got to get away from this. We came out of World War II with a huge military that helped inculcate a model of really big corporations where you went through a rhythm of patterns. We talk about, you know, terminal degrees, for example, and we turned an immense amount of power over to the academic, self-interested faculties who decided that becoming like them was good. Okay, so, you know, they would like students who show up on their topic that they teach, and the students are all nice because otherwise they get flunked. So the faculty feels good about the experience. And if the students don't get jobs, that's tough. I mean, Gallup, who I work with on some things, Gallup is now doing this project with Mitch Daniel, who is the president of Purdue. And they went out and they interviewed the alumni and they interviewed the faculty. And they asked the alumni to what degree this was actually a national baseline that they were doing to set up a real sophisticated project at Purdue. They did like 35,000 people nationally, and they said, to what degree did you think your college was focused on you getting a job? About 6% said they were. Wow. They asked the provost of universities, to what extent do you think your colleges are focused on getting jobs? 94% thought they were. Now, that's a gap in reality, but it's because we turned over one of the most important functions of society to a self-interested group of preservationists whose primary interest is sustaining their own social status and their own income. And then we wondered why it didn't work. Well, Adam Smith would have told you originally, it never works, okay? So you start with Khan Academy gets 10 million visitors a month for free and teaches math and science. Duolingo teaches 6 different languages online for free. The next model is going to be tying the student to the business, to online learning, so they get mentoring at the business and get credit for it. This actually reverses 100 years of getting kids out of work. Because we begin to realize, maybe they're actually better off working than dropping out, and maybe they're better off working than joining a teen gang, and maybe it's better off to get them into a productive, Benjamin Franklin was apprenticed at 13 for practical reasons. The second part I make, which my wife disagrees with deeply, is I don't care if you went to college. Steve Jobs did fine. Bill Gates did fine. Just go out and work hard and be smart. If you learn enough, maybe we should give you honorary degrees, You create 3,000 jobs, we'll give you a master's in business. That would drive every business college professor in the country crazy. I'll close with this true story. I had a friend at West Georgia College who got so successful running his business, he was squeezed out of his faculty position in the Department of Business because they felt it was inappropriate for him to be doing something that was real as opposed to the theoretical study, and he wasn't writing enough on the theory of business creation because he was busy becoming a millionaire. And he said, okay, let me get this straight. I could stay with you clowns and earn $65,000 a year, but write a lot. Or I could go out, buy my second and third homes, live really well off, and occasionally he'll come to me to ask me to fund something. This is the world where, let's talk about honestly, the way he can't do it because they get in trouble. But I can talk honestly as a former faculty member. We need to have a really honest national discussion about learning as opposed to bureaucratic education, period.
So we've come to the end. As a kind of exit question, and you guys can kind of pivot off this and take 2 or 3 minutes to say whatever you want. But I wanted to ask you both this because, Newt, you were so integral. I think of all the great things that you did as speaker, and I mean what I said. You were the best speaker in 50 years. Now, I know that's not a high bar to cross, but you were absolutely. But you're a little better than Nancy Pelosi, right? But I really think one of your greatest accomplishments.
No one has ever before compared me to Nancy Pelosi. And if I'd known I was going to be subjected to this kind of ridiculous.
You never would have come. All right. So, one of your greatest accomplishments was the welfare reform bill of 1996. It was an incredible social policy victory. I mean, what happened after welfare reform? We moved people out of welfare into work. Their incomes went up. They made them. There's dignity in work. All of the points that you made. And here we are in 2015, and President Obama, and you know this, Governor, has eviscerated so many of those reforms. And how important is it that we get back to these? And if we have a President Perry, are you going to get back to these kind of work requirements for welfare?
Well, and let me just go a step further. De Blasio this week eliminated all the work requirements in New York City because he is the quintessential nutcake left-wing fantasist who believes you could somehow create a world in which nobody does anything, but they would work because they'd live off of somebody who magically somewhere was doing something. And he fits perfectly Margaret Thatcher's rule that the problem with socialism is you run out of other people's money to spend. Now, but let me go back to welfare reform because it relates directly to a conversation Rick and I had earlier today. If we had not had, and I was integrally involved in this for a decade, if we had not had, first of all, Ronald Reagan campaigning in 1966 on welfare reform, running for governor, if we had not had governors Leavitt in Utah, Allen in Virginia, Thompson in Wisconsin, Engler in Michigan, developing, experimenting, and working on it, we couldn't have done it. And I did something very radical, which led to some very real resistance, in that we actually had the governors bring in their policy staffs and impose them on the Energy and Commerce and Ways and Means Committee and said to the staffs of those two committees, the bill you draft will in fact be co-written by these people and will be approved by the governors or we won't move it. Well, which of course led to all sorts of anger because our side, frankly, at times is as much out of touch with reality as the other side. I mean, you get to be a federal legislative staff person. How can you be subordinated to working with state people as though they're your peers? But without that kind of practical real input, we could not have written the bill and it would not have worked. So there's a long gestation there, and I do think that not just Governor Perry, who obviously I'm very fond of, but we have an entire generation of governors. And Mitch Daniel, for example, who's now out being university president, we have a bunch of folks who can so dramatically infuse Washington with bold reforms and bold ideas that I think we could have a 2017-2018 period of extraordinary reform, led in part by the governors.
I agree. At the last Republican Governors Association meeting we had just the week after the elections, I think we are on the verge of a new period of federalism. I think that the governors are going to be driving it, just like Newt has talked about, and we need to go have this conversation with America and kind of share with them this vision. I don't know whether we need to come up with a new word than federalism, because a lot of people think federalism means the federal government takes care of it. So, but I know that is such a great opportunity for us. And you know, Louis Brandeis, who was not known as one of the most rock-solid conservatives that this country ever developed, but when he talked about that 10th Amendment and those states being the laboratories of democracy, and to let those states go out there and experiment and to innovate. And you know, if they come up with a program that's really bad and really doesn't work, it won't destroy America. It'll hurt that state, and then they will pick and choose, which is what a lot of these governors do today. And I want to share with you what the result of what has occurred in this state over these 14 years, and particularly the last 11, as we Republicans put policies into this place. What was the result of that? Well, the job creation you know about. You see that, you hear that, you saw and know now what environmentally can happen in this state. You know what population increases can occur. You know this great migration that people wanted to come and be a part of this state. But one of the results that don't get talked about enough, that I think is such a powerful story for us, again, and it's the narrative, and this is a positive, passionate, compassionate narrative about the cultural arts. Fort Worth has a new museum of modern art. Their museums have expanded by an extraordinary footprint. The Basses built one of the finest symphony halls in the world in the last decade. Fort Worth and Dallas have a zoo of both national prominence. Dallas has 2 performing arts facilities that are continuing to grow, the AT&T, the Meyerson. The Nashers relocated their sculpture garden to Dallas during that period of time. The Perot's just finished a new museum of natural science. Wow. The largest cultural arts district in America is in Dallas, Texas, 68 acres. This little government and university town that we're in today has a new museum of modern art, a performing arts facility, home to the largest film and music festival in the world. The only Formula One race in the United States is in this city. San Antonio has a new performing arts facility. And tonight in Houston, Texas, there are more theater seats available than any other city this side of Broadway. That is the result of the policies that we talk about that you all have implemented. There are some that call it the Texas miracle. I can't explain a miracle. That's divine. This is a Texas model, and it will work anywhere it is implemented. And that is the story of Texas, and I will suggest to you that's the story of the future of America.
Well, thank you all very much for your kind attention. I don't know how many of you agree with me. Brooke, I don't know if you'd agree with me on this. I found my ticket for 2016, Perry Gingrich in 2016 for America.